going to talk to you about the lead up to or the discovery of what we have in Ireland and our battle so far in terms of trying to get legislation to protect it. So obviously this is collaborative work. I wouldn't be able to do this work without scientific collaborators or actually a huge number of beekeepers across the island of Ireland and elsewhere, and members of the public and the funders, of course. It was quite hard to get funding at the start. NIBS, so the Native Irish Honeybee Society, was established in 2012 to try and protect and conserve Apis mellifera mellifera in Ireland. And they actually have coughed up significant money to generate genetic information on our bees when funding agencies wouldn't. So, Apis mellifera is a very variable species, and actually a lot of beekeepers are not particularly aware of what kind of bees they have, and I think it's really important that beekeepers are aware of the type of bees that they have. I put out a text message a couple of years ago when one of my bees got hybridized, one of my queens, and I asked, what kind of bees do we have? Let's talk about it, see if we can have a mating area that's good for AMM. And the majority of the members didn't really know what bees they had at all. So there's a lot of education really needed by BIBA here, and again in Ireland it's very hard I guess not all beekeepers are aware. They're busy making honey and enjoying their bees, and they're not really thinking about this type of stuff, but it is important. So over thousands and thousands of years of evolution, bees through as they dispersed from their areas of origin across the continent of Europe, and actually Apis mellifera mellifera, which is native to Ireland and the UK, is talked about by Rutner as the pioneering bee. It's a very hardy bee. There's about 30 different subspecies now described by Ilyasov in 2020 in 5 major lineages. And so this is, I think if humans left it alone, we would have more than one Apis mellifera. I think evolution will progress to a point where reproductive isolation has started. It's been described in Apis mellifera mellifera, partial reproductive isolation. Anyway, north of that line there is where Apis mellifera mellifera, it's its natural distributional range in Northern Europe. So Apis mellifera mellifera is native to Northern Europe, including Ireland and England, and C lineage bees, which is Ligustica and Carnica, are imported bees. They're a very different lineage from the M lineage, and this is quite important. In these subspecies, some people are very dismissive about the existence of subspecies. It is kind of a controversial term in zoology. I'm a zoologist. But really, there's arguments, it can be an academic argument about subspecies, but really they are evolutionary units, and they are distinctive. And if left, we have lots of stuff on speciation. If left to their own devices and if not interfered with so much, we could have the development of new species. And definitely these lineages are distinct in terms of biology, in terms of behavior, in terms of reproductive behavior, in terms of morphology, and now with genetics and genomics, they're clearly distinct. So the problem is with Apis mellifera mellifera is that it has been completely decimated throughout its natural range in the last 100 years. So since Langstroth developed the movable framed hive, and beekeepers prefer quieter bees on the hive, this has kind of caused a revolution actually in beekeeping, which has been detrimental to the native bee in Northern Europe. So it's assumed in 2014 to be extinct or almost extinct throughout its range. Yes, there are pockets of pure, nearly pure Apis mellifera mellifera around the place. In the UK you have almost pure Apis mellifera mellifera. Colonsay has pure, Scotland there are pure, and there are pockets of it throughout the UK. But it wasn't sure, and when I started 2013-14, really, even in Ireland, did we have only a couple of pockets of Apis mellifera? There were certainly beekeepers that had black bees, but were they really black Apis mellifera mellifera? Were they hybrids? Were they Carnica? What were they? So the issue, what we have is that because of beekeeping activity, yes, beekeepers are custodians of honeybees to some extent, but can also do an awful lot of damage to the wild bee, the original species. And the imports, massive imports, thousands of importations into small areas can cause untold damage and undo thousands and thousands of years of evolution. And what happens, one of the main effects, which I didn't say yesterday and I should have, is something called homogenization. And this is where all those thousands of years of evolution, where the bees have become adapted to very different geographical areas and environments across Europe, what happens is by people bringing in thousands of bees from one area to another and swamps that native population and underpins or props up those imported bees by feeding them and minding them, and because they don't survive very well, keep bringing in more and more and more. Over time, you can get homogenization. So all the distinctiveness gets lost, but also the original pure populations of those become isolated into small populations. And we all know from conservation of other animals that once any animal is restricted in number to isolated populations, that creates a whole cascade of other evolutionary effects that cause lack of variation and a pathway to extinction. So it is serious, and we also have disruption of these genetic complexes that have evolved for thousands of years. Lots of different reasons. Importations are some, but of course there was an initial massive population crashing in Ireland and England in the 1920s due to what was then called the Isle of Wight disease, but was itself a composite of a number of different factors, including the impacts of World War I, climate and disease. And of course then we have habitat loss and pesticide use and all of these other things coming in on top as well. So when I started working on bees, I wasn't kind of involved in this at all. But I started reading and hearing all of these things, lots in the grey literature and spoken and online. Was really the Brother Adam is pretty famous in Ireland. Really, there's quite a religious community in Ireland, and we respect religious entities. So Brother Adam has a lot of respect. He's quoted as saying that the native bees in the UK were completely wiped out by the Isle of Wight disease, and by connotation, Ireland is very close links with the UK. It was assumed that the same thing happened in Ireland. Lots of conservation biologists, insect biologists and beekeepers saying that there are no feral colonies left, no wild colonies left in Ireland because of Varroa, and no wild or native colonies left because of Varroa. So we had two massive population crashes. One was in the 1920s due to the Isle of Wight scenario, and the second was when Varroa came. And it's true that there was massive population crash, but it didn't mean that things went extinct. And we now know through the work of Bailey and Norman Carrick's doing great work in this area as well, that Brother Adam was actually wrong. He might have had I didn't know Brother Adam, but anyway, I don't know what his rationale was, but he was wrong in some of the things he said, but because of who he was believed. And anyway, we do have lots of wild colonies in Ireland and the UK. They are surviving, and and we do have native bees. So Native Irish Honeybee Society, obviously their job is to protect and conserve native bees, much like Bibba here. And the question, we've had lots of meetings, and before I ever got involved, NIBS were meeting with the Department of Agriculture to ask, can we get legal protection for the native bee in Ireland? And DAFM, so that's the Department of Agriculture, Food and Reed, said no, there's no proof that AMM exists in Ireland. You need to bring us proof that they actually exist before we will do anything to protect them. So there was a lot of serious disbelief about the existence of AMM. So this just shows you that, well, we do have AMM, and actually when you survey, this was a survey we carried out with beekeepers a couple of years ago. I have trying to get the paper finished to submit it, but we did submit an abbreviation of it in John Biakara last year. But nearly 90% of the beekeepers that we surveyed are keeping dark bees, and there was a parallel survey run by the Irish Beekeepers Association in Ireland as well that had a very similar result. And the reasons for it are actually kind of nice. So it's the best bee for local environment. The bees were already present in the local environment, so they're just using what was there around them. And there was a lot of people that are interested in conservation, and that's nice. Now, the people who answered the survey are probably the people who are interested in this, right? So there's a whole load of people. Beekeepers are very bad at answering surveys. You need to improve on that too. But anyway, so I'm not going to talk about all of the data from this, but we worked with the colleagues in the Limerick Institute of Technology with 2 PhD students working on this together separately, and we combined the data and published it using mitochondrial DNA and microsatellites across, we did about 412, I think is the right number, of bees across 80 different locations across 24 counties in Ireland. So, and we showed our main aim was to prove that pure Apis mellifera mellifera existed in the country, and that's what we did. So then we go back to DAFM and say, now here's the proof you wanted that we have Apis mellifera mellifera in Ireland. Now will you actually help us get legal protection for these bees? And then the answer was no, this isn't sufficient because you actually focused your study on NIBS members, and this isn't a true reflection of what's in the country. Now our aim of that paper was to prove we had AMM because it was doubted, right? But actually in that paper, which they ignored, we had included a number of wild colonies. But they're right, they was focused on primarily on beekeepers that were members of NIBS. So the main problem for our Department of Agriculture is that bees are officially called domesticated. So they're one of the, I think the only animal that's actually has a dual recognition as wild and domesticated. But we know that bees are not domesticated. We manage them. We can't control their foraging or their reproduction. So they're not managed like sheep or cattle. So they're not domesticated at all. But anyway, there's no differentiation between managed or wild acknowledged here. And it's true it is the same population, but the honeybee was originally a wild animal. And it's actually neglected. If you look at the list of endangered domesticated species, it doesn't mention Apis mellifera, the honeybee Apis mellifera at all. And if you look at the IUCN Red List, it has data deficient because there was no information about wild honeybees up until 2014, the last list. So the problem though with the Department of Agriculture is trade. So Ireland is petrified that if we ban imports from Italy, that the Italians won't buy our Baileys and our whiskey anymore. That's really that it comes down to. They're afraid of this impact on trade. But the second thing is really that I think the government, and they're right, they're afraid to be embarrassed. So if you bring in legislation in Europe and then somebody contests it, the Irish government can end up with egg on its face. And you know, we have to, in fairness, be careful that we don't do something that will be embarrassing in the long term. So this is the problem, that honeybee is a domesticated animal, and under free trade laws, we can't block trade. So, but one thing was that we had to, generate information that actually it exists in Ireland as a wild species that's under threat of hybridization from non-native subspecies, and the European law provides very, very well for member states to protect their local biodiversity. Biodiversity is becoming more and more important, so member states are not only allowed, but we're encouraged to protect what we have. And you have this, the precautionary principle, which we're trying to apply, is that we want to protect it before we lose it. So we did a lot of work looking at wild bees in Ireland. So we put out a call on the local newspaper, and Dick Alstrom of the Irish Times did an article for us, and we had over 200 responses within a couple of weeks. 2 weeks, by the time they published the article, we were on holiday, so we came back with our phones full, and anyway, it was really crazy. So we sampled, we had no money because we had actually applied for money. We were told, well, they don't exist, we're not funding you. So myself and my student had to go around with the technicians in a van and just try and phone people and go around and sample colonies around the place. So the study was limited because of that. So we found bees everywhere, in trees, up high and down low. This one on the left, the tree that died out, because you can see the colony is, it's very low to the ground. It got flooded out a few years later. These are my students. I need to improve on health and safety, but anyway. I have since trained all the team in height, and we have refused to sample some locations since because of health and safety. So yeah, lots of climbing ladders. Lots of places like this bungalow was, the bees were in there for 10 years, and the people living in there were observing them on a daily basis. So they're not only there in lots of places. Yes, about 30 or 40% of them will die out within 1 year. They're not tough. They're probably escapes from managed colonies that can survive in the wild. But we also have a cohort of bees that can survive and do survive for multiple years. And it depends on the cavity that they're in as to how good that is. We find that roof cavities seem to be a very long-term nest site because obviously it has huge benefits. It's warm, it's dry, it's large, whatever. So yeah, and Ireland has a lot of old stuff. We've a lot of old buildings, old castles, old farmhouses, old walls, old everything. Tumble down places during the Celtic Tiger, lots of holiday cottages half built, and then recession hits, and so we have a lot of stuff around the place. A lot of castles, so Portumna Castle has got quite a lot of, a number of wild colonies, and I had an email from the OPW yesterday, been in touch with them, but they want to build in native honeybees into their operational plan for all of their sites, not just Portumna Castle. So we're working with those to document colonies all over the country in their sites. Lots of different ways to collect, from putting a jam jar up in front of a small entrance to these bug busters. The bees hate these. They're little. You can buy them on Amazon for about €15 if any of you want to collect bees and send them to me. It eats batteries. Bees don't like it, but you just put it at the entrance and hoover up very gently. The bees don't get damaged at all. So what we showed from that study was that basically we basically have bees that are surviving a minimum of 3 or 4 years, so after the time at which you would expect death by varroa. That's the result. We cannot put our hands on our hearts and say that all of these colonies didn't die out and were replaced, but we know that a significant proportion of them that is true. That the custodians that are monitoring them well. This is a snapshot. It doesn't mean that only 2 colonies survived 4 years. What it means is at 2018 or 19, when we stopped this, a lot of those colonies that we'd only sampled for 2.5 years at that time are still alive. So a proportion of all of these bees are still alive today. Some have changed lineage. We've documented a change from an M, so local bees, to imported bees at a number of sites, which you would expect. But we're happy that quite a number of them are surviving. So what we've been doing is looking at a number of different genetic methods. One is mitochondrial DNA, which exists in our cells, and it's a little organelle in our cells that's separate from our chromosomes, and it is responsible for energy production in the body. And it is a nice molecule to use. It's only inherited by the female, so we can tell what the queen is by looking at this molecule. And what we do is we sequence DNA from every bee, and then we're looking for things like this. So changes between the different bees. These are called homologous sites. They're inherited, and we look at the patterns of inheritance of those to look at relatedness between bees. And we can draw these diagrams, which are essentially like pedigrees. If you were looking at your dog or horses, and you're looking at a horse and the Dyer and the Shire and the Dam, and going back in time, and you're looking at relatedness, that's all it is. They're linked, these branches with the little dots are looking at mutational differences between these different bees. So each of the circles represent a bee. The big box in the middle in orange just shows that about 50% of the bees are identical in the mitochondrial DNA to bees from the Netherlands, and it might show the amount of imports of Apis mellifera that brought into Ireland after the Isle of Wight from the Netherlands in skeps. But what we also see here is that a lot of the bees, the wild honeybee colonies, are distinct from each other, and distinct from these ones in bold are ones from Elise Pinto's paper in 2014, where she looked at bees in protected populations in Europe. And most of the Irish bees are distinct from all of those. We do, in the managed bees, we do see some similarity to some in France, and we see some similarity to UK bees. In our wild bees at the moment, we haven't seen haplotypes that are here in the UK and in France, but there's very little data in the databases. So I wouldn't read too much into this, but what is important is actually at that time when we did this work, all the maternal lineages were from free-living bees were AMM, so we didn't detect any subtype, any C lineage at all in between that 2016-2018 samples. We collaborated with Elise Pinto's group to use their SNP assay, which is now being run by BeeBites in the Roslin. It's Mark Barnett and David Ragg and Matthew Richardson. They've set up a new company called BeeBites, and they're supplying the service at cost. Actually, it's a community-driven service if you want to genotype bees. And this actually just shows you here. So these are, SNPs are just single base pair changes in DNA. So DNA, A, C, T, and G. Where you get a change in a base in one individual to another, that's called a SNP. It's just a change. And in terms of color coding here, if you get an entirely blue section, it denotes you've got a lineage M, so that would be an AMMB, 100% chance that is a B. If you get all orange, it's a C lineage with really high probability, and where you get half and half, this denotes really hybridization or integration. So what we see, the message here, is that the vast majority of wild bees in Ireland and actually managed bees in Ireland are essentially pure. And we do have some hybrids, but very few. Microsatellite analysis, I'm not going to go into in detail. The microsatellite analysis is another method. It's an old DNA fingerprinting method that's actually used by CSI and for paternity testing and everything. And it looks at repeat regions in genomes which mutate very fast. And you can tell differences between individuals. The only thing I want to show here is that what these graphs show are that the Irish free-living bees compared against bees in Europe, so Swiss bees, French bees, Norwegian bees, and this graph here is the free-living bees against the managed bees in Ireland. And the more the dots cluster on the straight line, the more identical they are. So what this is showing is that the Irish free-living bees and the Irish managed bees are the same population. They're virtually indistinguishable. And we get very little introgression from the C lineage bees in our microsatellite data as well. So all three methods were agreeing at that time. Very little C lineage evidence in Ireland in our wild bees as well as our managed bees. So then, because we went on holiday and when all of the information came in that time and we had no money and no staff, and we were in danger of not documenting things properly, we partnered up with the National Biodiversity Data Centre, and they put together a reporting tool for us, which FIBCA or NIBS could take over if I ever stop working on honeybees. It's for the public, it's for people to report instances of wild honeybee nests in Ireland, and it's doing really well. This is from 2019, actually, this graph, but we have nearly 500 reports. We didn't publicise it at all last year. They keep coming in all the time, reports of new nests. This is a picture from Bunratty Castle. So yeah, we can sample it because it's up in a very high window, but it's really cool. Look at that. The bees have got in under here, and they've been there quite a while. So we have lots of reports. This is a colony in a nest. It's just nice to see it, isn't it? Sometimes, live bees in a talk. They're nice dark bees down in the middle of nowhere in the Ina Valley in County Clare. So lots of, there's a very, very old, really high manor house, I guess it's from the old types of the landed gentry in Ireland, and really old house, and there's about 3 colonies in the roof of that house for over 20 years. So we developed now, I edited this morning to put in. Joe Ibbotson and Philippe Salbani here in the UK have been helping us. They've been looking at bees in Boughton Estate and Blenheim and helped us develop this another wild bee hunting method for these large-scale bee hunting across different areas. So a lot of our reports are from urban areas where people can see them, and so we're now trying to find wild bees in our national parks. So we have been using these methods as well to try and find bees, and we find them in, again, this is in an estate of a castle in County Galway, but we also find them in old churches. So there's a colony of bees up here in the ventilation, first reported to me about 5 years ago. I live near here, so I'm keeping an eye on that colony. We also use phenotypic approaches. So this one was worked on, some students of mine were using drawing, so I presume you're probably all familiar with drawing and MorphPlot. Adam Tolfiski's software, but he's discontinued support of that software now, and we didn't find it really good for our bees in Ireland, and whether our bees in Ireland are different to them in Poland, I'm not really sure, but he's discontinued support for it. So a lot of beekeepers use the discoidal shift and cubital index to look at their wings. We also look at colour. So you've got a banded bee up here with orange stripes that indicates, hybridization is buckfast. Or we're not finding so much ligustica in Ireland. What is buckfast? Well, so we compare. We are looking at colour. Colour is not the be all and end all, but we're hoping to be able to provide beekeepers with a really good interrogation of how good colour is and when it's good. So we are building all the bees now. We sample all the bees we process genetically. We're documenting colour, and we're also doing wings. So we should have a huge data set pretty soon. When we started looking, we went collected bees between 2019-2020, and we saw a very different scenario. There's been a big increase in imports in Ireland in recent years, up 300% from years before. And since Brexit, we've had an even bigger problem because people are coming up through Ireland to bring bees into England. It's a significant concern for us. What my student found was now all of a sudden we start to see this gap, this missing bit in the mitochondrial DNA sequence indicates a C lineage. They don't have this region. It's the P segment, for those of you who know. So C, we're finding now, so this would be about 7 out of 30 or so samples were C lineage, and we start to see A lineage for the first time in Ireland as well. That's probably a Buckfast B. Well, I don't know what Buckfast is. We haven't sampled enough of them. They don't tend to give us any to sample. I'm not sure what they're necessarily afraid of, but it would be really good to get a good picture of what Buckfast has become in recent years. Because now people are breeding Buckfast in Ireland, and it's been back-crossed with mellifera quite significantly, which is good, I suppose. So with microsatellites, some kind of interesting results as well. We do see some lack of purity, but actually much fewer of the bees with microsatellites were not pure in comparison to the mitochondrial DNA. What does that mean? It means that the microsatellite DNA is all of the genes on the chromosomes, and it takes into account the queen and the drone influence. So if you remember, I said the mitochondrial DNA is only the queen. With microsatellites, we can now see the impact of drones. And what I think is my hypothesis, and I'm hoping to prove it in the next few years, is that a lot of, when we get imports and there are swarms from imported bees, we see traces of that in the mitochondrial DNA. But what we're seeing is that they end up getting back-crossed. I think that the local drones are fitter than the imported drones, and so they get back-crossed with native bees, so that from the nuclear DNA, the chromosomal point of view, they're essentially pure AMM, but we can identify that originally the queen that started that colony was the C queen. So we're starting to see these different kind of patterns of gene flow and hybridization. But what is also interesting we need to look at is that there seems to be 2 clusters of M lineage circulating in Ireland. Now, Victoria Buswell has seen something similar in Cornwall, and we're trying to work out if it's just a statistical aberration or if it's a real signal. If it is, it will indicate that in Ireland we have bees that are very similar to other European bees. So blue here is C lineage, Ligustica incarnica. Red is Apis mellifera from reference populations in Sweden, France and Norway, and these came from Apigenics, Gabrielle Solond in Switzerland, her reference collection. And then these are managed bees in Ireland, wild bees in Ireland, and then I also sequenced some bees from the Netherlands, from the UK, which Roger sent over. What we see is that the red would show that these bees are very similar to European AMM, which is probably a reflection of ancestry, because bees will have come to Ireland and England through Europe. But is the green something that represents evolution within Ireland since it becomes separated from the UK? So we're going to look at that. So conclusion so far is Apis mellifera is common in Ireland in its pure form. Evidence for a cluster of bees that are kind of unique to Ireland. Wild colonies surviving multiple years. So we have this unique genetic resource in Ireland that where bees are adapted to our climate, they perform pretty well and are, at least some of them, must be showing some tolerance to Varroa. So they are worthy of conservation protection in their own right as wild species. So as it happens, you know, providence is a great thing. We just seem to have a situation a couple of years ago where nibs have been battling away all the time, but really banging our heads against a brick wall. So with the passion of nibs trying to drive this, we've started to accumulate, you know, good scientific evidence of what we have in Ireland. But really it's took these two to come on board. Vincent Martin is a Green Party senator. He became a beekeeper about 3 or 4 years ago. He's also a barrister. That tipped the balance because he found out the story. He's buddies with one of the nibs guys called Reardon. And really he put him straight, and then he brought on board some of his buddies in the Climate Bar Association, and these are a legal group in the east coast of Ireland that provide pro bono work for environmental issues. And so they have reviewed all of the legislative things of interest and agreed that there is a really good case that Ireland should protect what we have, our unique biodiversity in Ireland. And together we, well actually, you know, the lawyers drew up this protection of the Native Irish Honeybee Bill, and Nibs and I we met quite a lot of times to, because their understanding of bees is not great, and our understanding of the legal stuff. So that combination has been great to get this bill together. So Vincent Martin introduced it to, like here we have an upper and a lower house. The upper house in Ireland is called the Seanad, and he introduced it to the Seanad in October 2021. The Climate Bar Association has provided evidence that really there is a legal opportunity to ban imports into Ireland. It doesn't contravene European law. European law allows for this to happen. The trade laws can be avoided if there's a good biodiversity reason to do that. So they've done their homework there. Vincent Martin then, as I said, he became a beekeeper. Okay, so the bill was introduced to the upper house, went through the second stage in June in 2022, and actually the beekeepers of Ireland came out in force, out in front of the gates of the Dáil, and challenged and talked to politicians as they went in. There was a real concern that the second reading was going to be on a Thursday evening of a long weekend, and that the senators would all go home. So Vincent Martin was afraid he'd be the only one sitting in the Seanad with his bill, but in fact quite a lot of senators stayed around for it, so there is a genuine interest in here. And the chairman was really surprised that about 8 to 10, I can't remember which one, they're all available as well online, they all gave speeches about the bill, and they were all unanimously in favour of the bill. So normally the chair would be kind of looking at a debate or having a conclusion about a debate and getting a vote, but it wasn't necessary. Everybody in the chamber was agreeable to this. I mean, there were queries about it, of course, how it would work, and some questions, but they were all in favour. So Pippa Hackett, who's a junior minister, then also she turned up, which was actually really good as well. But she again kind of hedged her bets, she plumosed everybody, but at the end of the day raised questions about whether imports were actually having a negative effect on the survivability of AMM. So they're really quite afraid to support the bill. So the next steps, Senator Martin has requested the government to proceed with the third stage. So there's about, I can't remember now, is it 6 or 8 stages at the upper house and then the same at the lower house? So it's a very slow process. So he has requested, just last month, he's requested the government to proceed, putting the bill through the third stage. At that point, the bill is thoroughly discussed by a committee, but it's kind of understood perhaps that if the government allows it to get to this stage, that's probably it. So the government have to be really careful. If they allow it to go through, it's likely that they won't really have a leg to stand on to prevent it further on, that they've let it through the gate at this point. And that all of the discussion at the committee will really just be to improve it rather than prevent it. So the government cannot decide to let it go through. They can block it at this point, and they are seeking further legal advice with the Attorney General. So we're happy about that they're actually taking it really seriously, and they're really looking at the impacts of this for Ireland and for the government. She requires robust evidence that hybridisation with imports is at risk to the survival of AMM in Ireland, and this is quite tough. It can be still, you don't have enough evidence, that could go on ad infinitum. So we're really at the moment thinking about how best, we're asking them a lot of questions about specifically what evidence they want, what evidence do they want us to generate to prove this, because it's difficult. So at the moment we're planning to collect and screen as many samples as we can, again across the country, openly, just looking at what do we have in Ireland now. We definitely have seen an increase in imports in Ireland, and we're starting to see that in the genetic data, but we need to see, there are some pockets of Ireland where imports are a real problem, and we need to pick that up and show that this is a threat to local ecotypes in Ireland. So where are we now? Well, we're meeting DAFM next week to discuss non-legal ways to protect AMM in Ireland. So at least they're taking us very seriously now as well. Well, I don't know. Waiting to hear if advice to government is to proceed with legislation. So we might hear more about that at that meeting. I doubt it, but anyway. If it gets through the stage, there's a good chance of it being passed. But we need to provide yet more evidence about the impact of imports. And this will probably be good science outside of Ireland as well. It'll be good to broaden this out. So I currently have 2 projects going on. Stephen is working on he's a data science student. We're generating a lot of genomic data to look at fitness and compare fitness between, the first thing was actually looking at to prove, so there's a lot of skepticism about colonies living in wild locations. People assume, well, they die out and they get replaced. but we need to prove that in some situations they're actually the same colony is persisting for multiple years. And we need to do that using genetics. So he's currently in Switzerland with a lot of data. We've sequenced, we've queens, and then we've 30 offspring, and we're trying to reconstruct queen genotypes. So it's quite complicated, beyond my pay grade anyway, or beyond my intellectual capacity, but thankfully I have people like Stephen and collaborators. And Alex, this is a picture of her last year, because she gave a talk here last year. She did her project here she's from the UK, and did her project, her undergraduate project with Steve Martin. And now I have her, she's great as a PhD student. And we got some nearly €500,000 finally from SFI to work on this, to look at fitness differences between wild and managed bees, and also looking more deeply at this impact of hybridization. So what is the direction of gene flow? What's happening to hybrids? What impact are they having on local bees? So this is started, Alex just started in January, and Arrigo Moro just started a month ago. So we have the next 4 years to do this work. So what we're doing is we've been generating pool-seq data. So this is where we combine in a bowl 30 bees from a colony, and we dissect out the thoracic tissue from the bees, and we sequence the whole genome from those 30 bees. We're also now urgently trying to get information across the country more inexpensively. So we're using Bee Bites. They're generating SNP data for us on bees from right across the country, managed bees from across the country. We're looking at colour and morphometrics and SNPs and everything we can throw at it to look at what's going on in the country. This is the kind of data that we can produce. So this is again, it's just another schematic diagram to show the relationships between bees using DNA. So it looks a bit scary, but it's not. It's literally just a way of connecting bees that are more similar or more genetically related. So here you can see the Carnica bees are all grouped together. They all branch together. There's a single branch leading to Carnica, indicating that that's one group from a single ancestor. So Carnica is very distinct from Mellifera mellifera. And all the green along here, using this analysis, they're all closely related to each other, and these are the Mellifera mellifera, pure Mellifera mellifera bees. What we see is that it shows evidence of local mating. So we see here Owen's bees from Louth have a very single, they have a branch just leading to those, so they are all very more closely related to each other than they are to anything else on this graph. Here we see the Connemara bees. So in Connemara, they've been trying to breed bees there and not try and have other bees coming into Connemara. And we can see that that seems to be working because all those bees group together. And down here we've got with Tipperary, there's a clade of bees here from the Galtee, and also Alan Forskett, who's a big proponent of natural beekeeping and treatment-free beekeeping. So he hasn't been treating his bees for a long time, but though he's down near the McGillicuddies, and those Tipperary bees are grouping together. So these are my bees in Mulrook, which is also in Galway, but you can see that our bees in Mulrook and Galway are distinct from our Connemara bees. So we are seeing patterns. Now we're only starting to analyse this data, it's Mahusif, but we see that there are two groups of hybrids here. So we have this group of orange hybrids that is distinct from this group of red hybrids. And these are bees from the Broughton estate here, which are in the Apis mellifera mellifera group, but they're distinct because there's some levels of hybridization going on. So basically we have to understand, and I don't understand yet, and this will be key to understanding what the impact of hybrids are and imports are, and in which direction. So I need to look at what's going on with the queens here, and maybe even what genes are being impacted here by these, what are these two different groups? My student thinks is that this one is just more hybridized than this one. That this one has, but to me they're very distinct. He doesn't understand evolutionary biology, and that's what I am. To me that doesn't explain it well enough, because this is a very clear, distinct branch leading to these bees. So it suggests that they're quite different from these bees, more than just levels of hybridization. But this, for those of you who do know about genetics, this is just based on allele frequencies of, it's over 200,000 sites across the genome. So they're, you know, how we, the different evolutionary dynamics of the different sites across the genome, what different genes are impacting. We have to link this data back to function and different genes and what they're doing. So we have a good bit of work to do in the next few years. But you can see the power of the data. And the data generation is becoming cheaper and cheaper. So we are doing work for metrics as well. Drawwing has stopped being produced. We are using Deepwing's, Alice Pinto's group in Portugal have developed a new software, and actually it's really accessible to all beekeepers. So Drawwing wasn't that accessible, it was very finicky, but Deepwings is a web-based, so if you look it up, if you're curious about your bees, it's really easy to take 10 or 12 of your bees. They use 19 different landmarks in terms of detecting differences between the bees, and this just shows you a picture of what you can do. So you literally just get a slide or a piece of Perspex or something, take the right forewing off 10 bees and place it using double-sided sticky tape in rows like that. And you can do it single bees as well. You just take a photograph, or you can do this and scan it in a printer and get a scanned image, and you literally upload that image to Deepwing software. It's that easy, there's no fiddling, and it'll give you a result with a probability of what your bees are. It's that simple. So beekeepers, I've started showing this locally, and beekeepers in Galway have started just themselves just pulling wings off and checking it and have confirmed that it's very straightforward to do. And it will give you a probability of what your bees are, and there's a 5 subspecies classifier which is perfect for Ireland and England really, because that's where our bees are. In England it might be a bit more complex, maybe you're getting bees from other places. And we also look at colour as well, and we look at size and shape. So future work is really a combined approach, genetics, morphology, disease, so we're looking at and behaviour to compare the fitness of wild and managed treated, untreated bees, and also looking at these elements in relation to between pure bees and hybrid bees. So our hybrid bees that we find out in living in wild conditions, can they survive in the wild? And how long do they survive in the wild? Do they get more disease? Do they get less disease? You know, what is the impact of hybridization? How do the hybrids do in relation to others? Do they get back-crossed very quickly? How long does that take? So we do want to look at whether the queen heading up such colonies are M or C, and what is the impact on the offspring, and what is the mating decisions of that queen? Are we getting queens selectively mating, selecting local drones because they're fitter in the local area, and what happens in that context? So I'd love to look at drone fitness as well. There's not a huge amount of work done on drones, and I think we need to look at that. And also we have to consider the impact of climate change and what's going to happen in Ireland and England. Look how warm it is these few days, it's crazy. Our bees are active more than they ever have. So what's that going to mean for beekeeping practice?
With the bees that are in the wild, how many have you genetically tested to see on continuity? So what's your sample size to say that they are the same bees? I notice from your circle you've got genetic samples of 165 in that sample. So are they being constantly checked?
So we when we started this work in 2018, we didn't have any funding. We didn't really know. I had only started bee research at that time, and at the time, other studies were taking kind of 2 bees. So we didn't take enough bees back in 2015-16 from enough of our colonies. So so the samples we're collecting more recently. So we had very few colonies where we had 30 bees, which is really awful. So my student, the data scientist, what we've done is he's collected 10, 20 and 30 bees from colonies, and we're comparing the data to see if we can use the information from 10 bees, will it give us the same information as from 30 bees? So he's in the middle of doing that now, and then we are going to sequence any of the ones where we have at least 10 bees, but there's not a huge number of them. So I am kicking myself really badly, but this project now we've started sampling again in 2020, and from those we're taking lots of bees, and the project is going to work forward to 2025. So we're very conscious to collect that data now every couple of years from the colonies, so that in 4 or 5 years' time we'll definitely have a much better data set.
Bee wing morphology, is that written up somewhere that we can look at. I'm thinking as apiary manager for Woodstock near Blenheim, I would like to defend our reputation of this allegation that was made yesterday. And I think our members would be up for actually testing and bee-wing morphology their bees over the winter. We can make a little project of it.
Fantastic.
So if it's written up somewhere, I'd love to know so we can disseminate it amongst our members.
So we haven't published anything really on morphometrics yet, because we're building that, and my plan is to make it freely available. But the Deepwing software is very easy, and I'm happy to help. So if you look on Deepwings, and they have a paper just came out this year, and we actually contributed 500 bees to it or whatever, so that data is in there. I can send you pictures of our data, no problem. I can send you our data, and I'm just trying to finish a publication from that work that my student did last year from 1920. We have mitochondrial DNA, microsatellites, and the morphometrics, both with the old drawing and now with new Deepwing software, and I'm trying to get that paper finished. So I'm happy to send you a draft of that as well, even prior to publication. And we're hoping to publish that on Beacker and Four Seasons, and we were thinking where to publish it here, but we'll probably go for JAR, and that'll be available to beekeepers.
How different would the Irish MMM be from other European MMMs?
Yeah, we don't know. Irish and UK bees have adapted to the weather here, the climate. And I'm surprised that despite the importance of the bee, there hasn't been a large, well, Smart Bee now have done some work from a genomics perspective, but not really drilled down to that detail. So they collected bees from around Europe, but that's the only study that's actually looked at. Nobody's looked at AMM from Russia over to Ireland and from Scandinavia down to southern France to really look at the diversity in there. And the scientific committee in SICAM, which is the Society for the International Society for Conservation of AMM, we actually represent scientists from that distribution range, so we're looking at kind of putting that data together. So I wondered, drawing was very poor at assigning Irish bees to AMM, and I wonder if that is because either a selection driven by beekeepers or a selection driven by the environment in the extremes of Europe, that are the wings, because they need to be stronger for flight in damp weather and windy weather here compared to Poland, and that's where Adam developed that drawing. So I do wonder whether the wing morphometry is different in Ireland and England in comparison to more Eastern Europe of AMM, and I'm hoping that we can pull that out. So short answer, I don't know, because even in Ireland I'm seeing different morphotypes of bees, big bees and small bees, and I don't know if hybridization is impacting, are hybrids bigger? Or some people say that the old Irish bees are bigger, but then some say they're smaller. So I'm in the middle of collating data, but actually I need to collate more data from outside of Ireland to put what we have in Ireland into perspective, and I don't have enough of that data yet. It takes a lot of time, but we need to go there. There's a study in Norway, and I saw a presentation on it this year, and I don't think they've published it yet. Sonja Ledenberger, no, that's probably the wrong name. The Nordic Brown Bee Project compared Mellifera, Carnica, Buckfast in a range of factors, and Victoria Bushwell in Plymouth, and her PhD has been doing some of the genetics. So there's going to be quite exciting work coming out of that in the next few years to keep an eye on as well. They found significant differences.
You mentioned that in England we have a lot more hybridization, probably because perhaps there's a lot more commerce, more beekeepers, more importing. And in Ireland you've got purer AMMs. And first thing we think of, okay, let's import some black bees from Ireland. But what's your attitude to exporting bees? I mean, you want to ban the import. What about exporting them?
Yeah, that has come up a bit because people are taking Irish bees to Europe. And I actually, in all conservation projects you have restocking, and you have, Ireland's not that far from England. I don't know. I mean, I think it's really unfortunate in the UK that probably Brother Adam had such an influence, and when there was this gap that it just got, and you've got a lot more commercial beekeepers here than we have in Ireland. Now, there is a problem. You bring bees from Dublin to the west and they don't do well. So we definitely have ecotypes. But I do think if you bring bees, like, I guess it's a decision in terms of, you know, definitely in Ireland and England, the bees are not, well, they would have been separated by a number of thousand years once the sea levels rose. But I don't know, like, obviously now I'm dithering here, haven't I? So on the one hand, I've thought about this a bit and I haven't really concluded. I think, what's the greater benefit? And if we would have to be a sea change in the UK to do that, though, there would have to be people to speak up and just kind of work on local bees. And I don't think even sharing bees within the UK locally, you know, people are seeing that bees become darker when they're left alone, even in the UK. And there are pockets of native bees in the UK. So Colonsay have bees from Ireland. So bees have been taken over from Ireland from time to time to seed. And I think it depends. I think you'd have to sit down and look at the implications. And it would be likely that the bees, you'd have to match the environment, the UK environment with maybe the environment in Ireland you're taking them from, and look at the implications of that. I'm not totally opposed to it because it may, you know, is it worth trying to augment AMM in the UK and let it then be? If people are bringing in imports anyway from sea, why not try and bring in imports of the bee that was originally native? And see how it goes. But they'd probably have to be minded for a while because and matched according to location and geography.
Going back to drawing, I found that if you use the automatic mode, there are 2 points which you've got to manually move, and I think that might skew the results slightly.
Okay, yeah.
I may be wrong. So the earlier question, that might partly answer that.
Yeah. But I think deep wings is the way to go. It's so easy. Pop it in, you'll get an answer.
I was just looking at Deep Wings, the website. I can't find any instructions on the website on what to do. It just gives you a somewhere where you can put the drawing or
That's
photo.
all you do.
That's all they do. But
It's that simple.
Is there? But you explained how to do it on your presentation. Is there any way? Is there anywhere to find that information online?
I'm happy to share the slides with Bibba, and they can circulate accordingly and put them up. And anyway, this I guess is going to be on YouTube, so that method it will be there to take. But literally, you just pull off a right forewing, place it on. You can place it on something and photograph it individually, or you can put. You want to do 10 per colony though, or 12. Double-sided sticky tape is what we use from the pound shop. Anything, and then so if you're using a scanner, you'll have to play around with it. So it's just the quality of the image has to be good, and be careful. You have to crop the image, and so you need all the parts of the wing. But it's that straightforward.